The Super Mario Bros. Series is nothing short of legendary. Its universal game design and consistently high level of quality have propelled it to exceptional popularity. So exceptional, in fact, that several entries in the series rank among the best-selling video games of all time. It is also, by the same measure, one of the most important game series in history. Perhaps even the most important, thanks to its crucial role at key turning points in the evolution of video games, and to the enduring influence that has inspired thousands of titles still being released today. Yet, despite its monumental legacy, the series is increasingly overlooked and pushed aside. Few people truly realize just how important these games are, or the profound mark they have left on the medium's history. So how did the series manage to lay down revolutionary foundations? How did it create entire genres of gameplay? And how has each installment continued to push the experience further, introducing bold new ideas into the franchise? Today, we revisit the Super Mario Bros. Series, exploring their development, the historical context of their release, analyzing their game design, and the legacy each one left behind. Let's begin right away with one of the most important games in the history of video games. In the early 1980s, Nintendo was still in the midst of its transformation from a toy manufacturer to a video game company, but it lacked credibility and was virtually unknown outside Japan. One game would change all that: Donkey Kong. Released in arcades in 1981, Donkey Kong is credited as the pioneer of platform games, titles built entirely around the mechanics of jumping. Designed by Shigeru Miyamoto, with the support of Gunpei Yokoi, it was a revelation. Hugely popular, it established Nintendo as a company capable of delivering innovative games and gave it newfound credibility. In 1983, Nintendo followed up with Mario Bros., another platformer, this time built around the multiplayer concept Miyamoto wanted to explore. But that same year, the video game industry faced the biggest crash in its history. Public trust in video games collapsed under the flood of poor-quality titles. Countless clones, and even sexually explicit games, whether on consoles or in arcades. Many argue this was a purely American crisis, but that's not true. I found several sources mentioning a downturn in Japan's arcade market after the Space Invaders boom. And in Europe, magazines were reporting major struggles. Companies like Philips, Imagine Software, and Interton either abandoned video games entirely or suffered devastating losses. The crash hit the US the hardest, but it was undeniably a global event. Interest in video games was fading fast. Worse, they were starting to be seen as uncool. Arcade owners began replacing cabinets with pool tables and pinball machines. Dozens of companies went bankrupt, and Atari famously buried thousands of unsold cartridges in the New Mexico desert. Mainstream media pounced, declaring video games a passing fad. That same year, however, Nintendo released the Famicom in Japan. Against all odds, it was a runaway success and reignited the country's gaming market. Riding that wave, Nintendo began shifting away from arcades to focus on its console. Titles like Devil World, a maze game inspired by Pac-Man, and Excitebike, a motorcycle racer with an impressively smooth horizontal scrolling, something console players weren't used to, demonstrated the system's capabilities. This was followed by the Famicom port of Kung Fu Master, a beat-em-up that introduced the idea of end-of-level bosses. The Famicom's success was so great that Nintendo decided to redesign it for the American market, rebranding it as the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES. After a series of incredible twists and turns, a story I'll save for my NES documentary, the console launched in late 1985 to better-than-expected sales. But soon, the numbers began to slip. Outside Japan, no one seemed interested in video games anymore. The fad, it seemed, was over. The industry was on life support. Meanwhile, in Japan, Nintendo was preparing the Famicom Disk System, a revolutionary add-on that would replace cartridges with floppy disks offering greater storage, save functionality, and an extra audio channel compatible with synthesizers of the time. Before transitioning to this new format, however, Miyamoto wanted to create one final cartridge-based game that would push the technology as far as possible. At the time, they thought it might be their last cartridge game ever. The idea was to take the foundation of Mario Bros., add Excitebike's horizontal scrolling, include Kung Fu Master-style bosses, and feature large, detailed sprites like those in Devil World, all in one game. In parallel, they were developing a project called Adventures, which would become The Legend of Zelda. The two games were designed as polar opposites, evolving side by side with ideas flowing between them. For example, the rotating fire bars we all know from Super Mario Bros. Actually started life in Zelda before being moved over. The development was challenging as the team's goals were highly ambitious. Time and again, the one to break through creative roadblocks was Gunpei Yokoi, Miyamoto's mentor, whom he regularly consulted during the project. It's a fact that's rarely mentioned, but Yokoi played a crucial role in the creation of Super Mario Bros. And in Miyamoto's career as a whole, with Miyamoto himself describing Yokoi as the greatest source of inspiration in his career. And Miyamoto wasn't working alone. Takashi Tezuka teamed up with him on the project, taking on the crucial task of tying all those ideas together and giving them meaning. It's one thing to have a burst of creativity like Miyamoto, but it's another to weave those concepts into a coherent whole, turning them into actual game design elements. Miyamoto also wanted to introduce a major innovation: the ability for players to choose between walking and running, controlling their own speed, with the screen scrolling naturally to follow them. This was a huge leap from earlier platformers, where characters always moved at a fixed pace. Early prototypes used nothing more than a red square to represent the player, but soon it was time to design a real character. For Miyamoto, the choice was obvious: Mario. Since the 1983 arcade game Mario Bros., Miyamoto had been slipping Mario into other titles like Punch-Out! And Tennis as a referee. He loved the character, and Mario was also easy to program thanks to his mustache and cap, which avoided the need to draw a mouth and hair. Tricky details on the limited hardware of the time. During development, Mario was originally rendered small to save processing power, with other in-game elements made larger. The plan was to replace this small Mario sprite with a larger one in the final game, but when testing prototypes, the team had a new idea. What if Mario's size change happened inside the game, as a form of protection for the player? When small, you'd feel fragile and overwhelmed by the larger world. When big, you'd feel stronger and more confident. It was an elegant visual way to show whether the player had an extra hit point. That led to the creation of a power-up that made Mario grow, the Super Mushroom, inspired by Japanese folklore where magical mushrooms can make people gigantic. And it's this very item that gave the game its title, Super Mario Bros., and even named its setting, the Mushroom Kingdom. Miyamoto's original vision was an adventure where a jumping character traveled through aquatic, sky, and ground levels. But the team went further, adding underground stages, nighttime environments, bonus areas, and more. Toshihiko Nakago, the brilliant programmer leading the project's technical side, created custom background rendering algorithms to save as much cartridge space as possible. To conserve memory, they reused assets. The clouds and bushes, for example, are the same sprite in different colors, and even recycled sounds, using the same effect for taking damage as for entering a warp pipe. Storage was so limited, especially on early Famicom cartridges, that these tricks were essential. Even the use of varied colored backgrounds was groundbreaking. At the time, most games used solid black backgrounds to save resources and avoid confusing the player. Here, not only were the backgrounds colorful, but there were multiple variations with scenery and enemies layered in, all made readable by Mario's sprite standing out clearly against the environment. Nakago recalls the moment he first managed to display a blue sky over the brick floor of a level. I was shocked. I'd never seen anything like it on a console before. I even ran to find Miyamoto to show him. Once Mario's movement system was in place, the focus shifted to level design. For Miyamoto and Tezuka, the guiding principle was simplicity. Everything should be clear and understandable to anyone. Yet they also wanted to reward skilled players by letting them move faster through the stages. In other words, levels were designed to be explored slowly or speedrun, which was a radical concept at the time. They even hid small secrets like a way to gain infinite lives by bouncing a Koopa shell against a wall. Deliberately tricky to pull off. The team's creativity had no limits. They even turned bugs into features, like blocks that could produce multiple coins, which was originally a glitch but kept in because it made players eager to hit every block they saw. The idea of jumping on enemies to defeat them came from the team's frustration with Mario Bros., where you had to hit turtles from below to flip them over, a challenge in such tight spaces. Here they decided it would be more satisfying to land directly on enemies' heads. They brought over the turtles from Mario Bros., but made them drop their shells so players could use them as projectiles. A brilliant idea that became a staple of the series. It was around this point that they realized moving enemies were much more fun than static obstacles. Early prototypes had no enemies at all, just things to jump over. So the team began designing a variety of enemies to create different gameplay situations. Piranha plants that forced you to keep moving. Lakitu hovering above and dropping spinies. Bullet bills tracking alongside the scrolling screen. For the game's main antagonist, though Miyamoto struggled. He wanted to base him on the Ox Demon from Alakazam the Great, a 1960 animated film, but couldn't make it fit the game style. When Tezuka saw the sketches, he thought it was supposed to be a turtle, and reworked the design into the Bowser we know today, a fusion of the two concepts. Still, Tezuka pointed out that many enemies were too complex for beginners. To balance things, they created a much simpler, slower enemy that was easy to understand, the Goomba. One idea Miyamoto pushed harder than almost anything else was the inclusion of fully composed music for the game. At the time, most games had no music at all, or very short, simple loops created by the programmers themselves. Music was rarely integrated because it took up precious cartridge space and consumed processing power that developers preferred to allocate elsewhere. But Miyamoto was adamant. Nintendo needed someone dedicated solely to music. And so, after sending nothing more than a resume, without anyone at Nintendo having heard a single piece he'd written, Koji Kondo was hired. His first work at the company was composing the soundtrack for the arcade version of Punch-Out!, followed by several tracks for Devil World. When Miyamoto heard Kondo's music, he was impressed. Kondo's compositions were special, perfectly matching the games while being irresistibly catchy. Miyamoto quickly brought him onto Adventures, which would become The Legend of Zelda, and most importantly, Super Mario Bros. The team worked in a constant cycle of experimentation, building prototypes, playing them, giving feedback, making changes, then testing again. At one point, they even experimented with side-scrolling shooter stages for Mario and Luigi to break up the platforming, before deciding it was too much for an introductory game. There was already so much potential in pure platforming, and they didn't want to overwhelm players, so the shooter sections were scrapped for the time being. Meanwhile, Koji Kondo faced his own challenge. As he later explained, every time he sat down to compose music, the prototype had shifted direction so much that he had to start over. It was a reflection of Nintendo's development style in that era. Countless prototypes, constant testing, and letting all kinds of people, even those who had never played video games before, try the game, then adjusting accordingly. Think about how remarkable this was in 1985, when video games were still in their infancy. Teams were tiny, and yet Nintendo already had a dedicated composer who not only created music but programmed it into the game himself. That deep understanding of both the software and the gameplay allowed him to craft music that elevated the entire experience. Takashi Tezuka also played a huge role here. Unlike the rest of the team, he was not a seasoned gamer. When he joined Nintendo, he barely knew what a video game was. He hadn't played Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and only vaguely knew Space Invaders. This outsider perspective meant that when he played prototypes, he would spot even the smallest details that didn't make sense to someone unfamiliar with gaming. He became a guardian of accessibility, ensuring that anyone could pick up the game and understand it without any explanation. And the tests confirmed it. Every time someone tried the game, they were impressed, not just by the graphics and the music, but by how naturally they understood how to play. That gave the team enormous confidence. By the end of 1985, after months of delays, they had something extraordinary. Following an intense cleanup and optimization process, only 20 bytes of cartridge space remained. Miyamoto used them to design a crown icon that replaced the life counter once players exceeded 9 lives, a small natural reward that would reappear in future games. At last, the game was finished. When Nintendo employees tried it, they were hooked. Testers kept playing even after their work was done. Seeing this, Miyamoto turned to Tezuka and said, "This time, I think we've got something big." Hiroshi Yamauchi, Nintendo's president, was equally blown away, astonished by what the small team had achieved and glad he'd allowed them to push back the release. There was one last task: the box art and cartridge label. Miyamoto wanted a well-known artist, knowing the game's quality deserved every advantage, but with no time to commission anyone, he ended up drawing the cover art himself, which explains why the game's artwork looked different between early beta versions and the final release. Outside Nintendo, the video game industry was in its worst crisis ever. Inside Nintendo, confidence was sky high. They knew they had something special, a game that could change the fate of the entire medium. What they didn't know was just how much. Super Mario Bros. Launched first in Japan on Friday, September 13, 1985. Nintendo dreamed of selling 1 million copies in Japan. They hit that number in just a few weeks and went on to sell 6 times that. It was an explosive success that no one had predicted. The game was quickly translated and released in the United States, where it became a phenomenon. Despite limited marketing at first, sales skyrocketed, word of mouth spread, and week after week, excitement grew for Super Mario Bros., for the NES, and for video games in general. Stores that had refused to stock games were now ordering thousands of NES consoles. Media outlets that had declared gaming dead were suddenly running features on Mario. Players who thought they'd move on were rushing to get the game. On its own, Super Mario Bros. Revived the video game industry, brought it to the mainstream, became the face of the whole video game industry, and set the standards that developers would follow for years to come. It became the best-selling video game of all time by a wide margin, and sparked what came to be known as Mario Mania. The same success would repeat in Europe and everywhere else it launched. It's astonishing to think that a team of just 7 people changed the entire course of video game history. So what made it so special? How did it have such an overwhelming impact that it brought the industry back to life? And how did it establish design principles so ahead of their time that they're still in use today? The first level of Super Mario Bros. Is a masterclass in both game and level design, as is the entire game, but as an introduction, it's especially important. Remember, in 1985, video games were still a niche hobby, even on the verge of disappearing. Many people thought gaming wasn't for them. They weren't attracted to clunky, complicated, unattractive games. And then they saw this, a game with clear visuals, a character that stood out from the background, a world with color, scenery details, and animated sprites. This is where the magic of the first level and its invisible tutorial shows its true power, teaching anyone the language of video games without a single word of instruction. We start with Mario not in the center of the screen, but on the left side, leaving the right side open, subtly inviting us to move in that direction. As we walk right, the camera follows and blocks the left edge of the screen, preventing us from going backward. Without realizing it, we've just learned the core goal: reach the far right of the stage. That may seem obvious today, but in 1985 it wasn't. Many games at the time had no clear sense of direction. In fact, the entire stage is designed to anticipate what a beginner will do and to give them exactly the information they need, controller in hand. For example, a few steps forward, a Goomba approaches slowly. It's the only moving object on screen, giving us time to react. When it reaches us, our thumb naturally presses the nearest button. Mario jumps. But a block above stops our arc, causing us to land on the Goomba and defeat it. In that single moment, we've learned that the A button makes us jump, that blocks can be hit, and that enemies can be defeated by stomping on them. Naturally, we try hitting the other question mark blocks. One gave us a coin, and they flash on screen to draw our attention. The next one releases a mushroom, which bounces off the nearby pipe and comes back toward us. Because it looks a bit like the enemy we just saw, our instinct is to avoid it. But again, the low ceiling of bricks limits our jump, and we land on the mushroom, and suddenly Mario grows, accompanied by a distinctive sound. We've just learned that power-ups make us stronger. Next come pipes of increasing height. By holding the jump button longer, we clear them, learning the jump gradient and Mario's maximum jump height, something most games at the time didn't have. Jumps were usually fixed height. Soon after, we face the game's first pit. Beginners often jump too early here, and if they do, they hit a hidden block that produces a green mushroom, an extra life. If we don't find it here, the designers have a backup plan. In World 2-1, a setup with Koopas between two walls forces us to jump and discover two hidden blocks, one containing a 1-up. It's remarkable how much thought went into this, and it continues. A Koopa appears. Again, the overhead block stops our jump, dropping us on the Koopa, which retreats into its shell. Landing on the shell sends it sliding forward, knocking out incoming Goombas. This moment not only teaches us about shells as projectiles, but also about chaining actions. Soon after, closely spaced power-up blocks give us the Fire Flower. The enemies right after this power-up encourage us to experiment, showing the fireball's bouncing trajectory. Finally, we end the stage by climbing stairs and grabbing a flagpole. In just a few minutes, without a single line of text, we've learned the objective is to move right to progress. We can stomp or avoid enemies. Power-ups give us protection and new abilities. Pits must be jumped over. Hidden blocks exist. Green mushrooms give extra lives. Levels may have alternate paths. Koopas drop shells that can be used as weapons. Stages end with stairs and a flagpole. The level even allows players to discover sprinting naturally, thanks to the NES controller's simplicity, only 2 action buttons. But there's one last detail about 1-1 that perfectly encapsulates the Mario formula. Near the end, there's a staircase-like structure with a gap in the middle but a solid floor beneath. This is a safe way to practice a jump over a gap without the risk of death. Immediately after, there's a similar setup, slightly easier, but with a real pit this time. First, you introduce the player to the mechanic in a no-risk situation, then ask them to repeat it in a similar, slightly easier challenge. That philosophy runs through the entire game. Every new mechanic is introduced gently before the player is tested on it. At a time when video games were often brutally difficult, a holdover from arcade design meant to extend playtime, Super Mario Bros. Instead trained the player invisibly before challenging them. And much of that is thanks to Takashi Tezuka, who, as we've said, didn't play games before joining Nintendo. He quickly realized that the way games were designed back then didn't work for everyone, and in Super Mario Bros., he made sure they would. And here's where the game's intelligence really shines. At the end of each level, we encounter that staircase before the flagpole, but with variations. It becomes both a benchmark for the player's progress and a way to introduce new gameplay mechanics. For example, trampolines are first revealed in this context before they're used more extensively in later stages. The game's difficulty curve is brilliant, and the entire adventure is split into 2 halves. The first 4 worlds, 16 levels, are all about discovery, learning the mechanics, experiencing the different environments, and trying new gameplay styles like swimming or navigating moving platforms. The final 4 worlds revisit these mechanics but push them further, gradually increasing the difficulty. For instance, World 5-3 is essentially a harder version of 1-3. Enemies evolve too, from slow-moving green Koopas that can walk off edges, to red Koopas that won't, to bouncing paratroopers, to the Hammer Bros who rain down projectiles. Bowser fights become trickier, vertical levels more frequent, fire bars spin faster, and clever stage combinations emerge, like 6-3, which blends trampolines and moving platforms to create something entirely new. Coins play an important role in this design philosophy. They subtly guide players along the intended path without ever forcing it. And since collecting 100 coins grants an extra life, players are naturally motivated to follow them. There's never a moment when you don't know what to do, because coins are always there to show the way. A great example is a cloud-based bonus level. After collecting a pile of coins, the player reaches the end and finds nothing. The only way forward is to jump into the gap. To make this feel safe, coins are placed in midair over the void, visually teaching the player that in this specific context, it's okay to jump into nothing without dying. This careful approach keeps difficulty fair, but it also allows players to set their own challenge level. With multiple paths through levels, a built-in risk-reward system, harder routes yield better rewards, and the option to simply avoid enemies, players can decide how tough their run will be. The game even smartly places mushrooms or extra lives before especially tough segments, if you can find them. Even better, levels are built to work on multiple difficulty levels without the same stage. When you die, you return to a checkpoint. Lose all your lives and you're sent back to the very beginning. In the original version at least, later editions added the A+ start continue trick. This means stages are designed to be fun both the first time you see them and on repeat playthroughs, often revealing new possibilities when replayed. The game actively encourages speed. Falling platforms, seesaw balances, and spinning fire bars are all easier to handle if you sprint. A timer awards more points for quick finishes. Even in 1-1, the spacing between pipes is perfect for jumping from one to the next at full speed. One of the best examples is World 4-1. Here, Lakitu hovers above, constantly dropping spinies. You have three options. Try to defeat Lakitu, hard and risky, and he comes back quickly. Slow down and dodge each spiny as it falls, or sprint through the entire level. If you run, the pipe spacing is just right for leaping over piranha plants, and Lakitu stops being a threat altogether. The game even hints at this speedrunning mentality as early as 1-1. Stomp the first Koopa quickly enough, and you'll hit a block containing a Starman, letting you blitz through enemies at high speed. This design makes replaying the game far less frustrating, and the repeatability is also baked into the level design through pipes. In 1-2, you see Mario descend into a pipe in a short cutscene. Later, after a game over, you might instinctively press down when standing on a pipe in 1-1 and discover secret rooms packed with coins, or even shortcuts to later levels. The famous warp zones are another clever form of this. They are hidden in ways that reward improved play and light exploration, encouraged by other secrets like multi-coin blocks, well-hidden one-ups, and even maze-like stages. In 1-2, if you sprint through the final section, you can naturally land above the ceiling and discover the warp zone. It's essentially a primitive save system, embedded directly into the level design. Beyond its rock-solid design, the game's content was staggering for its time. Most games had maybe 5 to 6 levels. Super Mario Bros. Shipped with 32 across diverse environments. As Miyamoto intended, the scenery changes constantly. Lava stages, sky platforms, grassy plains, nighttime levels, underground caverns, water stages, bridge stages, and more. This variety not only fuels the sense of adventure, but also introduces new mechanics. Underwater levels break the rhythm with entirely different physics and enemies like bloopers, which push you forward. Underground stages maintain the same core gameplay, but feel claustrophobic thanks to low ceilings. Bridge levels appearing right after water stages feature Cheep Cheeps, leaping both from the water and back into it, as if continuing your journey after surfacing. And then there's the music, another standout element. While many games of the era had no music at all, Super Mario Bros. Featured distinct tracks for each environment, each perfectly tuned to the action. Koji Kondo composed the main theme, so its tempo matched Mario's maximum running speed, subtly encouraging players to move quickly, yet again rewarding skilled play without saying a word. Underground music feels tense, water stage music is slow and floaty, and Bowser's castle music is frantic and ominous. The Starman theme delivers an exhilarating rush of invincibility. Kondo even sped up the music when only 100 seconds remained, adding urgency, a trick that would later carry over to Mario Kart's final lap theme. And the sound effects are just as integral, providing instant feedback and satisfaction, whether finishing a stage or grabbing a power-up. Super Mario Bros. Wasn't just a great game. It was a perfect game. Every time I talk about a game, I always play other titles from the same era to understand how good it truly was. And in Super Mario Bros.' case, the gap in quality is jaw-dropping. It was years ahead of its time, the result of a dream team, an extraordinary programmer who crammed incredible content into a tiny cartridge, a genius game designer brimming with ideas, a level designer who made the game approachable to everyone, and a composer who understood the emotional power of music in games long before it became the norm. It didn't just revive the industry, it marked the moment when video games moved from prehistory into history itself. That's how Mario became the face of gaming, and Nintendo rose to the top of the industry, inspiring countless imitators. Yuji Naka has often said that he loved Super Mario Bros. So much he tried to finish it as fast as possible, a seed that would later grow into the idea for Sonic the Hedgehog, and that's just one of many examples. A few months after release, rumors spread of a hidden bug that unlocked extra worlds. By clipping through the ceiling bricks above the warp pipe in World 1-2, players could reach the warp zone without it loading correctly, leading to corrupted, scrambled levels. This minus world became a true gaming legend. At first, no one believed it until Nintendo of America explained the trick and even featured it in Nintendo Power. Miyamoto wasn't thrilled initially, but in hindsight, he is glad it amused players, and it's even been referenced in later games. After the phenomenal explosion of Super Mario Bros. On the Famicom and NES, Nintendo began considering ports to other platforms. This was a transitional period. Many players still didn't own a home console. The game was ported to PC by Hudson Soft, which even made its own sequel to the Famicom Disk System and, importantly, to arcades. But because of the hardware differences between the NES and arcade machines, the game had to be redesigned for coin-op play. The arcade version needed to be harder. The original would have been too long and too easy to be profitable. So Miyamoto, Tezuka, and other team members reworked the levels and mechanics to raise the challenge. Warp zones no longer let you jump straight to Worlds 7 and 8. Extra lives now required 200 coins instead of 100. Many platforms were removed to force harder jumps. Bowser fights were more difficult. Certain stages required bouncing off enemies to reach the next section, and power-ups became rarer. This wasn't just about making the game harder, it was a full redesign tailored to arcade play, and the more the development team tested these changes, the more fun they had. They found themselves replaying these tougher stages over and over, constantly trying to do better. They began creating entirely new levels, discovering what we now call die and retry gameplay. The thrill of failing, learning, and trying again, until the moment of victory brought pure pride and joy. They shared these levels with others at the company, and the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Everyone enjoyed the challenge, and more importantly, they were experiencing emotions different from those in Super Mario Bros., revealing a new facet of what video games could be. The arcade version was released. In fact, it was the first version of Super Mario Bros. To arrive in Europe, and the feedback was good. That encouraged the development team's belief that there was an audience for a tougher Mario. The idea stayed in Miyamoto's mind, and eventually he decided to create a direct sequel to Super Mario Bros., one designed to be much harder, inspired by those arcade stages. It would be perfect for players who had mastered the original. He brought back the same development team, but this time, Nintendo faced two big problems: cartridge storage capacity, only a few kilobytes at the time, and the lack of save functionality. You couldn't write data to cartridges to save progress. That's where the Famicom Disk System came in. For the era, it was revolutionary with its floppy disks that could hold 3 times as much data as cartridges, allowed players to save their progress directly onto the disk, and even included an extra audio channel compatible with contemporary synthesizers to make composing richer soundtracks easier, at a time when most games didn't even have music. This shows just how much Nintendo valued the artistic side of the medium, wanting all games to have higher quality audio. On top of that, the discs could be rewritten. This led to the creation of disc writer kiosks, machines where you could insert your disc, pay the equivalent of a few dollars, and have an entirely new game written onto it. Naturally, Nintendo needed standout titles to support the new add-on, and the sequel to the groundbreaking Super Mario Bros. Was the perfect candidate. But there was a catch. The disk system was launching in just 4 months, leaving very little development time. Takashi Tezuka stepped in as project director, since Shigeru Miyamoto was heavily occupied. He had just become a father and was deep into development on The Legend of Zelda. Still, Miyamoto loved the project so much that that he would visit after hours to design levels and playtest the ones the team had made. He delighted in creating devious traps, tough stages, and in pushing the game's physics to their absolute limits. The rest of the team shared this enthusiasm. For 4 months, they focused intensely on level design, filling stages with clever hazards, inventive challenges, and new gameplay ideas.
VS システムというファミコンをベースにした業務用の機械があったんですね。で、それでスーパーマリオも作ろうって作ってる時に、じゃあせっかくなんでコースをいろいろ直してみようかってこう作り変えてると、なんか難しいコースができてくるんですね。それでもっと難しかったらどうかって、面白くないかって、もっと難しいコースを作ってみたんですね。そうすると結構楽しいんですよ。で、もう当然スーパーマリオを作ってる遊び慣れた僕らが楽しいわけですから、初めての人にとっては楽しいかどうかわからないですけど、少なくともスーパーマリオを遊び尽くした人にとってはこれ面白いっていうので、最初から無限ワンナップができるようにして、それでとことん難しいコースにチャレンジして、しかも変なコースって、普通の物理法則に逆らったようなコースとか、そういうものを交えて、作ってみたら面白かった。で、これ間違って初めての人が遊ぶと難しいと思うので、フォースーパープレイヤーズっていうシールを作ってですね、それを上にバーンと貼ったんですけども。
When the disc system launched in Japan, it sold well. 1 year after the revolution of Super Mario Bros., Nintendo released Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan. It became a hit, boosted by the stellar reputation of its predecessor, and went on to become the best-selling game on the Famicom Disk System. Reviews were also strong, journalists highlighting the difficulty but praised the challenge and the clever new mechanics. And indeed, the game was fascinating. Super Mario Bros. 2 shares a huge amount with its predecessor, its structure, its level progression, and even its story. Bowser has once again invaded the Mushroom Kingdom, kidnapped Peach, and you have to rescue her. The environments are the same too: grassy plains, underground stages, underwater levels, castles, nighttime areas. The same power-ups return: super mushrooms, fire flowers, one-up mushrooms, along with warp zones, secret passages, and more. The game doesn't concern itself with much beyond adding new levels, and that's already a bit of a sticking point. There are no new environments, very few music changes, and no new ultimate goal. It can feel less like a full sequel and more like a ROM hack of the original. The unique features of the Famicom Disk System aren't really used, even though this was supposed to be a launch title that showed off the add-on's full potential. With only 4 months of development, it's clear there wasn't much choice, but it's still a little disappointing. Visually, there's been a slight upgrade compared to Super Mario Bros. The ground no longer looks like a simple row of repeating blocks, and more decorative details have been added. Background mushrooms, tree-like shapes, extra clouds and bushes. Some sprites have been redrawn, like the mushrooms in Princess Peach, and certain platforms such as the seesaws have a new look. There are also new color palettes that create sunset levels, but this is just a small facelift, nothing groundbreaking. It's the same story with the music. Only one track, the ending theme, has been reworked, making use of the disk system's extra audio channel. And the result is fantastic. Richer, more engaging, and more polished than the original version. It's a shame the rest of the soundtrack didn't get the same treatment, especially since the ending music is something most players will never hear. The game is just that hard. In terms of gameplay, the core mechanics and Mario's controls are identical to Super Mario Bros., but here's the thing. The game expects you to already have mastered every one of those mechanics. Super Mario Bros. 2 is designed entirely for players who have finished the first game. This isn't an entry point into the series, or even into video games in general, the way the first game was. You can tell from the very first level. Where Super Mario Bros. Eased you in by teaching the basics, what an enemy is, what a power-up does, how high you can jump, Super Mario Bros. 2 immediately throws a paratrooper at you an enemy that only appeared in the later stages of the first game. Move forward a little and you'll see bricks. Naturally, you'll hit them to collect coins, just like in the first game. But here, a mushroom comes out of a brick instead of a question mark block, and it's stuck in a way that forces you to time your jump perfectly to free it. It sounds cruel, but what the game is teaching you is that you'll need to move fast. It's much easier to get that mushroom while running than standing still. Yes, you heard that right. Super Mario Bros. 2 is essentially built for speed running long before that term even existed. Many of the game's challenges revolve around maintaining top speed to clear obstacles, at times feeling almost like a racing game. But let's not rush ahead. Continuing through the first level, you hit a question mark block and get coins, and then a black mushroom appears. Remember in Super Mario Bros. How a mushroom would bounce off a nearby pipe, trapping you so you'd collect it? Here, it's similar, but you're not trapped, so you could dodge it, except for the piranha plant in your way. If that black mushroom touches you, you lose your power-up or a life. It's the game's way of saying, this is going to be tough. But there's a clever twist. If you collect the regular orange mushroom, you can break blocks and use the very first Koopa to farm infinite lives, right there in level 1-1. It's almost as if the game is telling you you're going to die, a lot. Soon after, you reach a 3-tiered block structure, showing that many levels have multiple paths, often with the higher path being harder to reach but easier to cross. There's even an easier route, though. Explore a bit and you'll find a Starman to breeze through it. Next, you face a red Koopa with more Koopas below it, set up so you can use the first Koopa's shell to take out the others and access question mark blocks. Then you encounter a string of enemies that introduces the only real change to Mario's physics from the first game. When you stop an enemy, Mario now bounces higher, and if you hold the jump button, he bounces even higher still. Combine that with top running speed, and you can launch yourself huge distances, a mechanic that becomes vital for clearing certain obstacles later on. What's smart is that the game teaches you this in the first level, then rewards mastery of it in later stages with access to secret rooms, before it becomes mandatory to progress. It's a small change, but it adds welcome depth and agility to Mario's moveset, which fits perfectly in a game this demanding. But this introduces a problem. At several points in the game, you're required to make what's known as leaps of faith, jumping without being able to see where you'll land or even if there's something to land on. It's the kind of design you wouldn't see today, partly because modern widescreen formats eliminate the issue, but also because it's now considered a level design flaw. However, the clever thing here is that all of these jumps are essentially the same distance, and if you approach them at full speed, you should clear them without a problem. It actually fits the game's constant push for speed and momentum. It may feel unfair at first, but in the context of the other levels, it's surprisingly consistent. For me, the best example of this speedrun philosophy comes from the game's biggest new feature. At the title screen, you can choose between Mario and Luigi. In Super Mario Bros., Luigi was just a green-tinted Mario for Player 2. Here, for the first time, Luigi is a unique character with his own traits. He jumps higher than Mario, but slides much more when slowing down. This gives him an advantage for skilled players, but punishes those who break too often, perfectly embodying the game's focus on speedrunning. These traits would go on to define Luigi's gameplay in almost every Mario game that followed. Now, let's address the heart of the game, its difficulty. Super Mario Bros. 2 is extremely hard. In nearly every level, you're immediately attacked by fast-moving enemies. There are pits everywhere. Poison mushrooms strip away your power-ups. Some stages force you to find hidden exits to progress, something the original only used in the final level. There are even trap warp zones, like the one in World 3 that sends you back to World 1. Your jumps are often blocked by bricks, sometimes invisible ones. Some paths are dead ends full of enemies. You have to search thoroughly to find power-ups. Even bonus stages are harsher. Compared to the original's generous coin rooms, here nothing is handed to you. Every reward has to be earned, making it feel all the sweeter when you succeed. The enemies are also far more aggressive. Hammer Bros now walk toward you and even jump. Bowser actively attacks instead of just leaping in place. New foes appear like red piranha plants that emerge from their pipes even if you're standing right next to them. There are upside-down pipes, auto-scrolling platform sections surrounded by enemies, narrow corridors filled with Koopas so that their shells ricochet back and forth trying to hit you, and enemy-packed gauntlets like World 8-1 that border on chaos. Compared to the first game, it's absolutely wild. The game pushes Mario's mechanics to the limit with new features. First, the Super Spring, a green trampoline that launches you incredibly high. Arrive with enough speed, and it can send you so far you might even overshoot the flagpole. It's yet another way the game rewards momentum. The red trampolines return too, but they're far more common. The other major addition is wind. It pushes you forward, boosting your speed and forcing you to keep moving. It's a fantastic mechanic, perfectly in line with the game's always go faster ethos, sometimes even making it mandatory. These elements are introduced gently, in simple environments, before being pushed to the extreme, and even combined for some of the most insane levels in the game. This wind mechanic would go on to influence countless platforms, even modern ones like Celeste, which draws from this game both consciously and unconsciously. To break up the relentless pace, there are also labyrinth-style stages that loop until you find the correct path or a hidden exit, plus water levels that drastically change the tempo, though they're still brutal, packed with enemies, and sometimes more stressful than the rest of the game. But the game isn't perfect, and in my view, it has some genuine level design issues. Chief among them, exploration. From the very beginning, the game teaches you that exploration is essential. It's often the only way to find power-ups, and you're expected to discover secret exits to progress. There are plenty of warp zones, too. In Super Mario Bros. 1-2, for example, one warp room had multiple pipes to different worlds. Here, there are 3 different warp zones, each with their own pipe. The problem is that sometimes you're punished for exploring, with traps or worse, warp zones that send you back to an earlier world. Early on, like the World 3 warp that dumps you back at World 1, it's not so bad. You can just throw yourself into a pit, lose a life, and restart. But later on, like the warp in World 8 that sends you back to World 5, there's no pit to jump into. You're stuck, forced to either backtrack or wait for the timer to run out, a painful 4 minutes just to restart. And there's nothing in the level design to indicate which warp zones are traps. For a game that demands and rewards exploration, that feels a bit cheap, and it does dampen the desire to poke around, even though exploring is key to success. That's not the only issue, though. Take World 2-1, for example. I hit a question mark block, and a paratrooper comes at me. I step back, jump to avoid it, and no. Instead, there are invisible blocks that stop my jump and trap me right on top of the enemy. That's genuinely frustrating and feels unfair, and it happens a lot toward the end of the game. Invisible blocks placed exactly where you'd naturally jump to avoid danger, turning them into traps. You can't expect the player to test every single jump spot to learn where the hazards are. These are the moments where I think the game goes too far. There are other examples, like in the brutally difficult World 8-3. It's full of invisible blocks and aggressive hammer bros, but suddenly you find a Starman, a huge relief. Except immediately after, you have to bounce off paratroopers to progress. If you're invincible, you can't bounce, which means you fall and lose a life. Technically, it's not catastrophic. You can farm infinite lives in this game, but it's still an annoying, unfair moment. There are also small inconsistencies. Some pits are filled with water, yet falling into them kills you instantly. Because the game also has underwater stages, this can be confusing. On top of that, the game occasionally suffers from technical issues. Sometimes there are so many enemies on screen that the console fails to load them all, making certain sections feel inconsistent or random. And perhaps nothing sums up the game better than its ending. You beat Bowser, rescue Princess Peach, but it's not over. If you completed every stage without using warp zones, you're rewarded with an extra set of levels, the so-called Fantasy World or World 9, and it's completely bonkers. In fact, it's like a stable version of the Minus World from the first game. Random, bizarre stages, including an outdoor castle, overworld stages filled with aquatic enemies like Lakitus, glitched enemies stuck in walls, and strange layouts. You only get one life to beat it, and if you die, it's back to the title screen. Thankfully, these stages are much easier than the main game. Finish World 9 and the final stage literally spells out "thank you" in Japanese using platforms. a tradition that would become standard, and you earn super player status, complete with a star on the title screen, another tradition in Mario games. It captures the essence of the game perfectly. Super Mario Bros. 2 is wild. It has a surreal edge. Aquatic enemies like pink bloopers swimming through the air, land enemies in underwater stages, traps everywhere, and it constantly pushes you to move fast and take huge risks. Playing it is a constant adrenaline rush. Frustrating, sometimes unfair, but incredibly satisfying when you finally clear a level. And since you can farm infinite lives and use unlimited continues, the game isn't as punishing as it might seem. In its own vision, entirely different from its predecessor, Super Mario Bros. 2 pushes its gameplay to the absolute limit, with new mechanics and level design that create a truly unique standout game. But that leads us to a debate. Super Mario Bros. 2 is only a great game if you've played the original. If you've never touched a Mario game before, this one is practically impossible. On one hand, that could be seen as a flaw, a game you can't just pick up and enjoy. On the other hand, it's exactly what makes it exceptional. It throws away the learning curve, assumes you've mastered the first game, and takes you on a much more intense, much more demanding yet wonderful journey. And it never stops. Beat the game 8 times, yes, 8, and you unlock 4 extra worlds, A through D, which are even harder. That's insane content for a game of this era. This game's influence on the industry would come years later. 2 decades on, a Japanese creator used it as the basis for a Super Mario World ROM hack that pushed difficulty and mechanics to their limit. Kaizo Mario World, alongside Super Meat Boy, which was also inspired by this game, it helped popularize the modern die and retry genre, which is still going strong today. And in Japan, Super Mario Bros. 2 sold quite well. Unfortunately, it would disappear from the global spotlight in an unexpected way. In Super Mario Bros., if you trigger Bowser to load and then quickly scroll him off screen in certain stages, his color palette loads incorrectly, turning him blue instead of his usual green. In Super Mario Bros. 2, there's an enemy right before the final boss that deliberately reuses this blue Bowser look, a nod to the first game's glitch, and that's where the confusion begins. In the game's guide, this enemy is called Bowser's twin brother, but in Super Mario All-Stars, the remake of the first 4 Mario games, his blue color is removed, making him just another fake Bowser, even though a blue Bowser sprite still exists in the game's data unused. Then in Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for Game Boy Color, he's back to being blue with no explanation. Over the years, official books and guides have called him Bowser's younger brother, a fake Bowser, or simply an identity shrouded in mystery. In Mario Golf and Mario Tennis, Bowser's secondary color is blue. In Super Smash Bros., his 8th costume is the blue variant, again labeled as an imposter. Even today, no one really knows what this blue Bowser is or what role he truly plays in the Mushroom Kingdom. To understand the story of this game, we need to go back to the early 1980s. After the success of Nintendo's first color TV game systems and arcade hits like Sheriff and Radar Scope in Japan, Nintendo opened its very first overseas branch, Nintendo of America. At its head was Minoru Arakawa, the son-in-law of Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi. The early days were rough. After Radar Scope had been a big hit in Japan, Arakawa went all in, ordering hundreds of arcade cabinets for the US, betting that it would find the same success there. He put almost all of the fledgling branch's funds into it, but to his shock, American arcade operators didn't care for the game at all. It was a complete disaster. With no buyers, Nintendo of America was on the verge of going under. That's when Arakawa realized something crucial. Cultural differences were huge between Japan and the US, and a hit in Japan didn't automatically translate into a hit in America. Luckily, around the same time, Shigeru Miyamoto designed Donkey Kong, which became a massive success not only in Japan, but also in the US, saving Nintendo of America and giving it room to grow. Other arcade games followed, including Mario Bros., which was also a big hit. Nintendo of America started hiring more staff, including Don James, one of Arakawa's first employees. James recommended a friend from university, a video game enthusiast, and that's how Howard Phillips joined the company. Phillips started out unpacking, assembling, and delivering arcade cabinets shipped from Japan. Part of his job was to test the games to make sure everything worked, and he quickly became obsessed. He loved Nintendo's games, and each new shipment made him genuinely excited. Arakawa noticed his passion and began regularly asking for his opinion, since Phillips, as an American, could better spot those cultural differences in game design. Over time, he became a sort of unofficial advisor. After Super Mario Bros. 2 launched in Japan, Nintendo was eager to bring it to the US. Competition was heating up. Third-party developers were releasing excellent games on the NES. So in 1986, Nintendo Japan shipped a box of new games to Nintendo of America for evaluation, and Super Mario Bros. 2 was in it. Howard Phillips was thrilled. This was the sequel to the phenomenal Super Mario Bros., one of his favorite games ever. He fired it up and died within seconds to the very first paratrooper. He tried again. This time a poison mushroom got him. Then a red piranha plant. The more he played, the more frustrated he became. He later recalled, "The more I played, the more the game demanded I take risks, and every risk ended in death. The game wasn't fun, no fun at all. It was punishment after punishment, and punishments I didn't deserve. I was shocked. How could Miyamoto design something like this?" Phillips stormed into Arakawa's office and insisted the game must not be released in the US. The American market was still recovering from the 1983 video game crash, and this sequel was far too difficult for the US audience, especially since American kids made up the core demographic there, unlike in Japan where it was more universal. A punishing sequel to the most popular game in the world could alienate consumers and hurt Nintendo's image. And difficulty wasn't his only concern. He felt the game looked outdated, too similar to the first Super Mario Bros. Back in 1985, those visuals were stunning, but video games were evolving so quickly that a year later it no longer stood out. Third-party developers were catching up, and Nintendo itself had already released more visually ambitious titles like Metroid and The Legend of Zelda. By the time Nintendo could manufacture cartridges and launch the game in America, it might already look old-fashioned. Arakawa was torn. After all, Zelda and Metroid had released in the US, targeted at older players, were difficult and still sold well. But remembering the radar scope disaster, he decided to trust Phillips' instincts and block the US release, judging it a poor fit for the market. And in the NES era, no US release also meant no European release, since European NES launches typically followed the American ones. The NES itself wouldn't even arrive in Europe until late 1987. Meanwhile, back in Japan, Nintendo hired a promising newcomer, Kensuke Tanabe. From day one, Tanabe pitched ideas to Miyamoto, one of which intrigued him, a platformer where players moved vertically instead of horizontally, digging objects out of the ground to use. Miyamoto, curious, gave him time to develop a prototype. A few weeks later, Tanabe's prototype was ready. The Super Mario Bros. Team found it interesting but not ready for a full game. Vertical scrolling was also technically more challenging at the time. Not long after, Fuji Television approached Nintendo with a proposal. They wanted a game for their summer festival, Dream Factory, to promote the event and draw bigger audiences. By now, the Famicom was selling at an incredible pace, and Nintendo had become a prestigious name in Japan. Nintendo accepted the deal and put Kensuke Tanabe in charge. Miyamoto, as supervisor, told him, "As long as the game is fun, you can do whatever you want." Tanabe took the prototype, reworked it to include more horizontal stages, made digging the core mechanic, added Mario-like gameplay elements, and based the playable characters on the festival's Dream Factory family, giving each unique ability. By summer 1987, development was complete, and the game was released on the Famicom Disk System as Yume Kojo, Doki Doki Panic. Around this time, Arakawa once again asked Yamauchi for a new Mario game for the NES. The Mario Mania was in full swing. Mario was everywhere, and fans were hungry for a sequel. Arakawa worried that third-party hits like Mega Man, Ghosts and Goblins, and Castlevania could steal the spotlight. Yamauchi was in a bind. Nintendo's teams were busy with other projects, and you can't just make a new Mario from scratch overnight. Then Arakawa had an idea: take an existing game and rework it into a Mario title. Yamauchi sent over several Japanese games developed by the Super Mario Bros. Team, one of which was Doki Doki Panic. When Arakawa and Phillips saw it, they thought it was perfect for the US. Its visuals were more advanced than the Lost levels, the music richer, and the gameplay easier and fresh. The decision was made. The team would replace the festival characters with Mario, Luigi, Toad, and Princess Peach, but go beyond a simple reskin. Graphics were improved, Mario Universe elements added, the run mechanic from Super Mario Bros. Was included, and countless tweaks made to better fit the Mario brand. Meanwhile, in the US, Nintendo was preparing the very first issue of Nintendo Power. To give the new magazine a huge push, it was distributed for free nationwide, with Super Mario Bros. 2 on the cover and a big feature inside. Excitement exploded. Everyone wanted the new Mario game, which looked gorgeous in the previews. The title was simply called Super Mario Bros. 2. Now there were two different Super Mario Bros. 2 games, the Japanese one, which would later be called Lost Levels, and the international Doki Doki Panic rework. Nintendo planned a US release for 1988, but a global chip shortage struck, limiting cartridge production. They faced a dilemma: release the game in small numbers and frustrate fans, or delay it and risk losing momentum. On September 1st, 1988, Nintendo went ahead with the launch despite the shortage. Every single copy sold immediately, and the Mario Mania roared back even louder, though the game was nearly impossible to find in stores. So, how did this not actually a Mario game measure up to its legendary predecessor? Did it truly deserve the Super Mario Bros. 2 name? And how did it shape the Mario series going forward? Surprisingly, the game had a big impact on the Mario series as a whole. You start up the game, and right away, the intro feels strange. In Doki Doki Panic, you're greeted with a short cinematic explaining that two children have been sucked into a magic book, and their parents jump in after them to rescue them. In Super Mario Bros. 2, however, we just get a block of text, a definite step back. It tells us that in his dream, Mario hears someone calling for help behind a door at the top of a staircase. When he wakes up, he sees that same staircase in front of him, climbs it, opens the door, and boom, the game begins. Let's start with the game's biggest strength, the 4 playable characters, each offering a different gameplay style. Mario is the balanced, all-around character. Luigi is slower but jumps higher. Peach is slower still, but she can hover for a couple of seconds, letting you recover from mistakes. And Toad is very fast, especially when carrying objects, but has short jumps, making him the hardest to use. What's clever is how the game design makes each character shine in certain stages while making others more challenging. Mario offers a standard difficulty. Peach makes some levels easier thanks to her floating ability. Luigi can bypass certain platforming challenges but is slippery, costing you lives if you're not careful. Toad's speed is great in the right context but demands precision due to his short jump arc. Each character also has 3 types of jumps: a normal jump, a longer jump when running, and a charged super jump that lets you reach higher platforms. The trade-off here is that the game loses the fine jump gradation of previous Mario titles. In Super Mario Bros., how long you held the jump button and your momentum created dozens of possible jump heights and distances. Here it's more rigid. Still, since the levels are designed with this in mind, it works, though it's a slight downgrade in nuance. The other huge gameplay change is how you defeat enemies. No more jumping on their heads, instead you pick up objects, often by plucking them from the ground, and throw them at enemies. This opens up tons of new gameplay possibilities. There's a much greater variety of enemies, each with distinct behaviors. You can dig up turnips, bombs, clocks that stop time, even rockets that transport you to another part of the stage. You'll need to find and carry keys to open locked doors, and time bomb throws to destroy walls blocking your path. This mechanic also changes how health works. You start each stage with 2 hit points, shown as hearts on the left of the screen. By finding potions and placing them in the right spot, you can reveal mushrooms that permanently add extra health for that run. The clever part is how the level design subtly guides you. like placing 2 cherries side by side or leaving open space at the start of a level, hinting at where to drop your potion. Another big change, 1-up mushrooms are almost non-existent. Instead, you can dig up coins to spend on a slot machine minigame at the end of each level, with a chance to win extra lives. It's not a bad idea in theory, but in practice, it's rare to actually win lives, making the system feel underwhelming. And since there are no saves and you only get 3 continues, lives are precious. Still, the digging mechanic adds depth and replayability. You might replay a stage with a different character to reach new items or discover alternate paths. Some levels even revolve around stacking objects you've moved to create makeshift platforms, turning the environment into part of the puzzle. Of course, this also means that coins can no longer act as breadcrumbs to guide the player, as they did in Super Mario Bros. Here, that role is given to cherries. Collecting 5 cherries spawns a Starman at the bottom of the screen, giving you temporary invincibility. Similarly, defeating 5 enemies in a row spawns a heart to restore health. This is a smart change. It lets the player adjust difficulty dynamically. You can choose to take risks to grab cherries or chain enemy kills for rewards, keeping that risk and reward spirit of earlier Mario games, but in a more direct and visible way. The core of the game is still a linear platformer, but unlike previous Mario titles, which were almost entirely horizontal, moving left to right with the entire stage height visible on screen, here the levels are much larger and far more varied. Sure, you'll mostly move from left to right, but there are plenty of stages where you're climbing upward, others where you're descending, and even a few where you backtrack to the left. It's fantastic because it breaks the strict linearity, keeping you guessing as you progress, and also lets certain characters shine. Luigi, for example, really excels in vertical stages. These levels are brilliant at showing off the gameplay depth. Right from the first stage, you're dropped into open space with the camera following you, instantly showing the difference from earlier Mario games and teaching you about the variety of things you can dig up: small turnips, large turnips, bombs, clocks, and more. And the environments are wonderfully diverse: deserts, plains, glaciers, caves, dungeons, a giant tree, a fortress, even the sky, all not just for visual variety, but to bring unique gameplay twists. Ice levels make your character slippery while enemies charge at you, forcing quick jumps or ducks. Sand levels have you digging downward, but if you keep digging straight down, enemies will fall on top of you. Quicksand tries to pull you under, but later you'll even use it to uncover secret doors. Other levels have you leaping from fish to fish, testing your timing. The enemy roster is just as rich. Shy Guys plod along harmlessly. Cobrats pop out of sand. Sniffets fire projectiles. Ninjas hop after you. Bees dive bomb you. Porcupines can't be jumped on. Spark orbs circle platforms. Fireballs zip unpredictably. Pink flamingos ignore POW blocks. And masks relentlessly chase you when you pick up keys. What feels new with them is how the enemies aren't just obstacles. You can use them as moving platforms, grab bombs from bomb-oms to break walls, steal a magic carpet from an enemy, or ride whales' waterspouts to higher ledges. It's a completely fresh approach to Mario level design. The bosses, however, are a bit disappointing. You face the same ones multiple times, and while Birdo gets tougher, even spitting fireballs, the basic strategy never changes. The same goes for the other bosses. Grab something, throw it, dodge attacks, repeat. Even the final boss uses the same structure. It's fine, but repetitive. Visually, though, the game is gorgeous compared to its predecessors. While Super Mario Bros. And the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2 were mostly flat grids of square tiles, SMB2 has rounded platforms, waterfalls, logs rolling with the current, and even lighting and shadow effects. Oddly, cave and castle levels look much plainer, almost like they're from a different game entirely. Despite all its strengths, the game has flaws. Technically, there are slowdowns and sprite flickering when too many enemies are on screen. The NES simply wasn't built for that. And while the music is catchy, most of it comes straight off Doki Doki Panic and carries a Middle Eastern vibe that doesn't quite match Mario's world. Boss music loops too quickly and can get grating. Another minor drawback, there are only 20 levels compared to 32 in the previous 2 games, though the larger, more complex stages make up for it. And after beating the final boss, you learn it was all just Mario's dream, which makes it feel a little like it was all for nothing, though story is hardly the main point of a Mario game. Because of its history, Super Mario Bros. 2 is both very different from its predecessors and deeply rooted in them. That's its greatest strength. Familiar enough to feel comfortable, but different enough to bring a huge wave of novelty. You're not saving Princess Peach from Bowser. You can actually play as her, alongside Toad. There are brand new environments, new mechanics, vertical scrolling, fresh enemies, and varied gameplay situations. Super Mario Bros. 2 is a very good game, often forgotten because it was released between two giants, Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario Bros. 3. But it played a crucial role, expanding Mario's universe and adding elements that would become series staples, from Bomb-Ombs and Shy Guys to a freer, less linear platforming style. Many of its ideas would be refined in Super Mario Bros. 3, which would become the ultimate expression of the series. Super Mario Bros. 2 introduced a new final boss, Wart, who created all the game's enemies using the Dream Machine, a dream revealed at the end when we see Mario sleeping. Wart makes a surprise appearance years later in The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening on Konolint Island, another dream world. There, he isn't an enemy at all. He teaches Link the Frog's Song of Soul for 300 rupees, which is required to progress. This cameo was thanks to Takashi Tezuka, who directed both games and remembered the character years later. Wart's name also appears randomly in Super Smash Bros. As a generated player tag, but aside from these nods, Wart has never been seen again. After the success of Super Mario Bros. 2, both the Japanese and international versions, the Mario Mania was still going strong. In Japan, the best-selling book was the Super Mario Bros. Strategy Guide. Mario was everywhere, on TV shows, in merchandise, even in songs inspired by the character. But as time went on, Japanese players were asking for a true sequel. The Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2, as we've seen, was essentially more levels for the original game, and its extreme difficulty made it far less accessible to newcomers. And remember, Shigeru Miyamoto had been less involved in the development of Super Mario Bros. 2. He had just become a father and was busy with other projects. But now he was finally free and ready to embark on what he called the Ultimate Mario. This time, Miyamoto would oversee everything, involving himself in every aspect of the game. Game design, level design, sound, characters, he was everywhere. He reassembled his dream team. Takashi Tezuka as project director, Toshihiko Nakago as lead programmer with extensive NES experience, Koji Kondo on music, Kensuke Tanabe, director of Yumi Kojo, Doki Doki Panic, and the brilliant Kazuaki Morita, who had helped program the first Super Mario Bros. When he was just 19. Also on board were rising talents like Hideki Kono, who would later help creating Mario Kart, and Katsuya Iguchi, whose skill had impressed Miyamoto enough to bring him on as a level designer. With such a talented team, the project was off to a strong start. By this time, cartridge technology had advanced enormously. They could now hold far more data than the Famicom's disk system's diskettes, thanks to Nintendo's own multi-memory controller. This allowed for double the available memory, better sprite handling, smoother scrolling, and even the ability to save data directly onto the cartridge, something impossible before. These advances would help keep the NES competitive for years to come. Everything seemed perfectly aligned for an exceptional project. With this in mind, Tezuka wanted to create something entirely new, and the development team began experimenting with bold ideas. They first tried designing stages with an isometric perspective, but Miyamoto wasn't convinced. In a platformer, that view made it harder to judge distances and jumps. Gradually, the team realized that meeting expectations would be extremely difficult. The bar was simply too high. They decided to return to the foundation of the first Super Mario Bros., but with a clear goal: to expand the gameplay to the fullest, with changes emerging directly from the level design itself. Ideas started taking shape, letting Mario slide down slopes, pick up and throw objects, and even take to the skies with a brand new transformation. To accompany these innovations, the team created an entirely new world, with richly detailed graphics, dozens of new enemies, brand new items, and diverse environments, all built from scratch. The colors were vibrant, the aesthetic cheerful, and nearly everything on screen was animated, even small decorative elements. They also added shadows and depth to make the visuals pop. The enemies drew inspiration from everywhere. Miyamoto created the Chain Chomp based on a frightening encounter with a neighbor's dog during his childhood. The boos were inspired by Tezuka's wife, very shy and quiet but quick to change her face when her husband came home late from work. And the Tanuki suit came from the Japanese legend: if a magic leaf landed on a raccoon dog's head, it could transform into something else. Level creation was painstaking. Miyamoto and Tezuka set incredibly high standards, demanding that each stage highlight the new mechanics in fun and creative ways. Hideki Kono recalled, "We drew levels on graph paper, laboriously, every day for months. Once the layouts were finalized, they were sent to the map room where developers would spend an entire day programming the drawn designs into the game. The first builds were often full of bugs and didn't always match the original concept, and sometimes Miyamoto or Tezuka weren't satisfied, offering changes and ways to improve them." Since the very first Super Mario Bros., Miyamoto had dreamed of letting Mario ride a dinosaur, adding a whole new style of gameplay. But once again, the console's power was too limited, and after a few tests, the idea was scrapped. So Tezuka came up with an alternative. Instead of riding animals, Mario could transform into one. Miyamoto loved the idea, and it became a key part of the game's design. Over the course of development, more and more power-ups were created around this concept. But with all these ideas, all these stages, power-ups, mechanics, and new worlds, the development team went through a grueling process. Miyamoto often stayed at the office all night, checking every single stage made by the designers, sending them back for revisions even when the issues were just tiny details. Katsuya Iguchi recalls, "If it could make the game even a little bit better, Miyamoto wasn't afraid to redo everything, or even delay the game's release." Tezuka remembers the exhausting work of implementing every single Mario animation into the game, losing count of the sleepless nights he spent at the office. And then there was Koji Kondo, working completely alone on the soundtrack and facing an enormous pressure. 2 years earlier, he had composed one of the most famous video game themes of all time, which had become the anthem of the medium. Now he had to create new music that wouldn't disappoint. On top of that, the development process was different this time. For the original Super Mario Bros., Kondo had composed the music alongside playable prototypes, tweaking tracks to perfectly match the on-screen action. But here, there was no early playable version, so he had to compose based on the game's worlds and themes, aiming to reinforce immersion. In the end, he wrote around 40 tracks, and Miyamoto and Tezuka helped choose the ones that fit best, leaving about 10 unused. For more than 2 years, the development was tough, but it finally came to an end. What Nintendo hadn't anticipated, however, was the changing market. New competitors were arriving: NEC's PC Engine, already more advanced than the Famicom, and Sega's 16-bit Mega Drive, which was about to launch with far superior graphics and power. Nintendo's own new console was barely in the planning stages. This meant Super Mario Bros. 3 carried a massive responsibility, not only to live up to the first game's legacy and avoid disappointing fans, but also to buy Nintendo enough time to develop new hardware and keep them from fading against technically superior rivals. On October 23, 1988, Super Mario Bros. 3 launched in Japan, and it was a tidal wave. Sales exploded, breaking the record for the biggest game launch in Japanese history. The gaming press was unanimous. It was a masterpiece, a stunning leap forward. For over 6 months, it stayed at number 1 in the charts, an incredible run. It completely overshadowed the PC Engine and, more impressively, stole the spotlight from Sega's Mega Drive launch in Japan. Mario was everywhere. TV commercials, merchandise, and even multiple new animated shows. A new Mario Mania, even stronger than the first, swept the country. The game drove Famicom sales to unprecedented speeds, crushing technically superior consoles. By 1991, thanks to Super Mario Bros. 3, Nintendo had overtaken Toyota to become the most profitable company in Japan. But then came bad luck. A major component shortage, longer than previous ones, hit the industry. Nintendo couldn't manufacture as many copies as they wanted. The game was sold out everywhere, and an international release was impossible under these circumstances. For months, Nintendo waited. They still sent a cartridge to Nintendo of America for testing, and when Howard Phillips played it, he was stunned. He couldn't believe it was running on the same console as the first Super Mario Bros. It didn't just feel like a new Mario game, it felt like the best game he had ever played. But in the US, Super Mario Bros. 2 had launched only months earlier, and the Game Boy was just around the corner. Finding the right release window was a nightmare, so Nintendo decided to wait out the shortage and the Game Boy's launch, using the extra time to prepare a massive marketing campaign. Super Mario Bros. 3 appeared in films like The Wizard. TV commercials hyped the game months in advance. American magazines imported the Japanese version, publishing reviews and screenshots. Fans sent Nintendo letters by the thousands, begging to know when it would come out. Finally, in early 1990, Super Mario Bros. 3 launched in the US, and once again, it was a phenomenon. On day one, it sold out completely. Nintendo couldn't produce cartridges fast enough to meet the unprecedented demand. Whenever it came back in stock, shelves were emptied in minutes. Even mainstream press outlets, often hostile to video games, were impressed. Paul Franklin of the Courier News opened his review with, "If Super Mario Bros. 3 were a movie, it would be up for an Oscar." It changed public perception of video games in the US, and the same happened in Europe, where the late-arriving NES suddenly saw sales skyrocket. For example, the French launch of Super Mario Bros. 3 set the national record for the fastest-selling game console in a single year. Super Mario Bros. 3 was a tornado that swept the entire world, unprecedented, and above all, powered by one simple fact: it was one of the greatest games ever made. The game opens with a story that's a little more fleshed out than before. Bowser and his 7 children, the Koopalings, have conquered 7 different lands, transforming each king into an animal, so Bowser can take control of the entire kingdom. Mario's mission is to free all 7 lands, boarding each airship to defeat the Koopaling in charge, and then finally storm Bowser's army in the 8th land to face him in the final battle and restore peace. The story is still simple. It's really there just to set up the adventure, give context to the characters you meet, and provide a sense of progression. What's surprising about Super Mario Bros. 3 is how its worlds feel like it's taking place on a stage. The title screen shows a curtain rising, with Mario and Luigi seemingly rehearsing. In the levels, platforms are bolted to the background. Everything looks like it's made of cardboard and paper. You end each stage by walking off stage. You can even slip behind the scenery, and after the credits, the curtain falls. It's a brilliant, original touch that gives the game personality, and helped it stand out at a time when many studios were trying to copy Super Mario Bros. And speaking of standing out, the graphics are phenomenal. It's a huge leap from Super Mario Bros., yet we're still on the humble 8-bit NES. Animations for enemies in Mario are smooth and full of life, and environments are beautifully detailed. The hardware's once choppy vertical scrolling from Super Mario Bros. 2 has been perfected here. Whether scrolling horizontally, vertically, or even diagonally, it's buttery smooth. The first major change you see is the introduction of a world map linking all the levels together. It's a fantastic idea that gives the game a cohesive world, lets you see the kinds of levels coming up, and allows for strategic planning, like spotting an upcoming water level and saving the frog suit power-up for it. The map also breaks up the linearity with bonuses scattered between levels. toad houses where you can grab power-ups, a randomly appearing memory game that rewards you with items or lives and keeps track of your progress, a slot-style card game for extra lives, and battles with Hammer Bros or Boomerang Bros that drop useful items. You can even choose alternate paths at times, skipping levels entirely if you wish, like in World 1 where stages 3 and 4 are optional. On top of that, the map lets you store the power-ups you earn and use them whenever you want. Certain special items also work directly on the map, like the music box that puts Hammer Bros to sleep so you can pass unbothered. The game even uses these intelligently. In World 2, you can grab a hammer early to reach a toad house containing the frog suit, perfect for the watery World 3 ahead. Clouds let you skip levels entirely, though if you die in the next stage, you're sent back to the one you skipped. And the rare P-Wing lets you fly freely over an entire level. Between these bonus items and plentiful early power-ups, the game is welcoming to newcomers, letting you stock up on lives and tools before gradually ramping up the difficulty toward the tougher stages. Like its predecessors, Super Mario Bros. 3 teaches you everything you need to know through clever, transparent level design. In Stage 1, you find the raccoon leaf, learn how to fly with it thanks to closely placed power-ups, and are guided upward to a bonus area by a trail of coins. Stage 2 teaches you to slide down slopes to knock out enemies and how to chain jumps on Goombas, exiting pipes to rack up extra lives. Stage 1 also introduces one of the game's biggest new mechanics, carrying and throwing objects. It's showcased immediately with a Koopa Troopa and a low block that can only be reached with its shell. Later in the same stage, using this mechanic rewards you with the brand new P-Switch, another big innovation, which turns blocks into coins and vice versa. Early on, these give you a great way to rack up extra lives for the challenges ahead. And the game keeps playing with these ideas. In the very next stage, you get the opposite version of the P-Switch. Coins turn into blocks, letting you reach a hidden area. And when you first see the coins, you'll probably grab them before hitting the bricks, only to realize you missed the secret. That little sting of regret teaches you to think before you act, and primes you to hunt for hidden P-switches throughout the game. Sometimes they'll open up huge coin caches, other times they reveal entirely new paths, like in World 4's Fortress, where coins shaped like a door give away a secret entrance, an idea reused later in 2 other fortresses. More than ever before in the series, speed is at the heart of the gameplay. There's even a speed meter on screen, with a sound cue when you hit top speed, and that top speed lets you fly for a few seconds with the raccoon suit. Levels still have a timer, slightly longer for maze-like stages, but now even the end-of-level goal encourages you to run fast. The flagpole from Super Mario Bros. And the slot machine from SMB2 have been replaced with a single block you hit at the end. It can give you a star, a fire flower, or a mushroom, and the faster you're moving when you hit it, the better your chances of getting a star. Get 3 stars in a row, and you're rewarded with 5 extra lives. It's a brilliant touch. The game pushes you to keep your momentum right up until the finish line, sometimes placing subtle traps to catch you if you're not paying attention. But it's really the level design that drives this emphasis on speed. Take the desert world, for example. You come to a tornado that pushes you back, and you can only get past it with enough running speed. That same level shows you that sprinting is also the easiest way to dodge the deadly sun that swoops down at you. Right after that, in the castle, there's a sequence of thwomps you can bypass easily if you just keep running. This is how Super Mario Bros. 3 teaches you new mechanics, subtly, without breaking the flow. Where SMB1 spent its first 4 worlds introducing mechanics and the last 4 building on them, SMB3 uses a different rhythm. A level introduces a mechanic, then ramps it up in complexity, and later brings it back in combination with other elements to create more challenging situations. A great example is Stage 7-3, which starts you with the Starman. As long as you keep your invincibility going, the first block you hit will give you another one, letting you tear through the whole stage if you time it right. A few levels later, the same idea returns but with tighter timing, leaving no room for error. Or Stage 4-5, where you have to bounce off a bullet bill to reach a high block hiding a warp pipe. Later on, the same concept comes back, but this time it's mandatory for progression. The game is full of these moments, teaching players step by step without them even realizing it. By the time you reach the later worlds, you've been quietly prepped for every challenge they throw at you. The level design takes the best elements from all three of its predecessors. From SMB1 and the Japanese SMB2, you get pure platforming stages, including auto-scrolling levels that force you to keep pace. These create a perfect risk versus reward setup. Push forward aggressively, and you'll have more time to grab coins, hit blocks, and find secrets. But you'll have less time to react to enemies and traps. Hang back, and you'll be safer but miss out on the rewards. The concept evolves even further here, with auto-scrollers that move vertically, and even ones that alternate between up and down. From the international SMB2, you get enemy-heavy levels, like Stage 3-7, crammed with spikes hurling spiked balls, forcing you to stay in constant motion. Sometimes progression isn't about platform-to-platform jumps, it's about weaving between enemy projectiles. The later stages blend both philosophies. Imagine an auto-scrolling section packed with bullet bills, cannons, fire jets, and rocky wrenches, tossing wrenches, then suddenly shifting to pure platforming sequences, like the giant screws you jump on to spin and move forward. These hybrids build tension and excitement, and they always lead into a boss fight. And the variety doesn't stop there. You'll encounter platforms that drop if you stand on them too long, musical note blocks that bounce Mario automatically, a stage stalked by a giant fish trying to eat you, maze-like stages with dead-end doors and looping pipes, vertical climbs on transparent blocks that change direction when you jump, quicksand pits, underground mazes where you have to use enemies as stepping stones, rotating platforms that can fling you, Lakitus dropping spinies, underwater jellyfish corridors, giant enemies, fortresses with randomly moving thwomps, and flames that chase you. The sheer scope is staggering, 90 different levels. On the NES, and it's not filler, every stage introduces a new idea, combines previous ones in clever ways, or offers a fresh twist. It feels like an endless well of creativity crammed into an 8-bit cartridge. These levels are grouped into themed worlds, each with its own identity. World 1 is a relaxed green plain to get you comfortable with Mario's controls. World 2 is a more hostile desert. World 3 is the ocean, full of underwater stages. World 4 is the land of giants. World 5 takes you high into the sky, where there's barely any ground. World 6 is an icy land where Mario slips and slides. World 7 is a labyrinth of pipes, and World 8 is Bowser's military stronghold. Each world pushes its theme as far as it can go, tying its stages together into a cohesive adventure and giving the whole game a real sense of journey and progression, more so than any Mario before it. Alongside all this variety and level design comes a massive roster of enemies. Of course, the classics return: Goombas, Koopas, Hammer Bros, Pokies, Bloopers, Cheep Cheeps, but there's also a flood of newcomers: spikes that throw spiked balls, giant fish that can swallow you whole, enemies hiding in blocks that spring out at you, massive-sized versions of familiar foes, white piranha plants that leap up to hit you from below, boos that only move when your back is turned, flying shells you can ride as platforms, homing bullet bills, boomerang bros, dry bones that reassemble themselves after you knock them down, chain chomps that lunge at you, and even the sun itself swooping down to attack. The variety is staggering. Some of these enemies appear as mini-bosses you'll fight repeatedly throughout the adventure. They get tougher over time, but because their transformation timing never changes, once you've figured them out, it's easy to land the required 3 hits, and the fights can start to feel repetitive. Fortunately, the main bosses are more inventive, with steadily increasing difficulty. They can stun you with ground pounds, throw projectiles, and mix up their attack patterns enough to keep you on your toes. And the final battle with Bowser is brilliant. Instead of simply hitting a switch to drop him into lava, you have to dodge his fast charges and fireballs while luring him into smashing the floor beneath his feet until he falls through. Mario's controls here are nothing short of exceptional. He's lighter and more responsive than in previous games, with smoother acceleration, faster jumps, tighter air control, and quick deceleration for dodging traps. The movement is complemented by a huge selection of power-ups. The classic Super Mushroom and Fire Flower return, but the star of this entry is the Super Leaf, which gives Mario a raccoon tail. It lets him swipe enemies, glide for a short distance, and most importantly, take flight after a full-speed run, revealing all kinds of hidden secrets. Every suit has its own niche. The Fire Flower is great for dispatching enemies quickly, especially underwater. The Hammer suit lets you throw hammers that can take out enemies' fireballs, like thwomps and boos, and also lets you hide inside the shell to block projectiles, though it's rare and tricky to find. The Tanuki suit has all the abilities of the raccoon tail, plus the power to turn into a statue, making Mario invincible and able to crush certain enemies. The Frog suit is perfect for swimming quickly and jumping higher in water, though it's slow and awkward on land. There's even a unique green shoe you can steal from a Goomba, which lets you stomp on otherwise untouchable hazards like spikes and piranha plants. It's incredibly fun, but frustratingly, it only appears in a single level. Another strength of SMB3 is that it isn't just a single-player game. The two-player mode returns, but with a twist. Instead of swapping turns only when one player dies, as in SMB1, you swap after every death or completed stage. This makes for a much more engaging co-op experience. And for friendly competition, there's also a battle mode based on the original 1983 Mario Bros. Arcade game, a fun little extra in an already massive package. If there's one real flaw, it's the lack of a save feature. The Legend of Zelda, released 2 years earlier, had battery saves, but adding that hardware made the cartridge around 20% more expensive. And since SMB3 launched during a component shortage that had already pushed up prices, Nintendo opted to skip it. Thankfully, the game still has warp zones, accessible by finding hidden flutes that were heavily hinted at in gaming magazines of the time. And while the lack of saving is frustrating at first, the sheer depth of each level, the abundance of secrets, alternate routes, and multiple ways to overcome obstacles soon makes it clear that replaying is part of the fun. In fact, this design encourages exploration, something that isn't even the core focus of a Mario game, and consistently rewards it with extra lives, power-ups, and hidden shortcuts. And now we have to talk about the big question mark, the music. Given the enormous challenges Koji Kondo faced during development, you might expect the worst. But it's the complete opposite. These tracks are outstanding. In fact, Kondo outdid himself compared to the earlier games, composing an even greater variety of themes tailored to different levels. Several outdoor stage themes stand out, one upbeat but with a steady, measured tempo. Another faster and more frantic, perfect for stages where the player is encouraged to pick up the pace. The castle music is dark and foreboding, matching the oppressive atmosphere of those levels. The airship theme has a militaristic edge, perfectly evoking the feeling of infiltrating enemy territory. Classic tunes return too, but expanded and more fleshed out than in the earlier games, like the underground and underwater themes. And it's all tied together with a wealth of sound effects that enhance the action, whether it's the satisfying thud of a stomp or the ominous boom when a cannon fires at you. With roughly 30 unique tracks, 3 times as many as the earlier games, the soundtrack adds yet another layer to the game's already monumental scope. Super Mario Bros. 3 is a masterpiece in every respect. Its endless variety, flawless and intuitive controls, the way every stage feels fresh thanks to new gameplay mechanics, and the brilliance of its level design, which constantly puts you in new situations. The difficulty curve is perfectly judged, the enemy variety staggering, and the power-up roster lets you tackle challenges in countless ways. This is the culmination of a legendary series, a series so influential that countless modern games still borrow its design principles. It takes the best elements from each previous title, refines them, and pushes them to an extraordinary level. It's hard to believe this game is more than 30 years old and that it was released on an 8-bit console. It's one of the rare games that flirts with perfection, where every aspect, technical, visual, musical, and especially gameplay, shines. Super Mario Bros. 3 didn't just raise the bar for the series, it launched Mario into the stratosphere. And yet, SMB3 is such a tough act to follow that Nintendo never really made a direct sequel. 34 years later, it still has no true successor. Nintendo instead moved on to new series inspired by it: Super Mario Land, Super Mario World, and New Super Mario Bros., a separate series despite the name. These series are different as they are much easier and emphasizes more on exploration than pure platforming. And SMB3 set expectations so high that when Super Mario World released, many players compared the two, and some walked away disappointed. But that wasn't the end for the series as we knew it. All 4 original Super Mario Bros. Games were completely remade for the Super Nintendo and released as Super Mario All-Stars. It sounds wild today, but back then, publishers actually released compilations of 4 full remakes in a single package, rather than charging $60 for one HD remaster. The collection even included the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2, renamed Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, allowing the rest of the world to finally play this brutally difficult entry. The All-Stars remakes were a huge effort. Physics, graphics, and music were all reworked from the ground up. While some lamented the loss of certain visual quirks, like the distinct stage play feel of SMB3, where the cardboard cutout look was softened by the SNES backgrounds, it was still a fantastic way to experience these classics. Later, the games were remade again for the Game Boy Advance, this time sold individually. They remained excellent, though the releases were less exciting as separate products. For the 25th anniversary, Nintendo re-released the All-Stars collection on Wii, unchanged. Yeah, that one felt a little lazy. Beyond that, this brilliant formula hasn't returned, and honestly, maybe it's for the best. It's still incredibly hard to imagine topping Super Mario Bros. 3. It stands as the peak of this style of Mario game, a high watermark that remains untouchable even decades later. The Super Mario Bros. Series didn't just shape platformers, it shaped the entire medium. From its revolutionary game design to its unmatched sense of creativity, it redefined what video games could be, inspiring generations of developers and players alike. Its ideas became the foundation for countless titles across every genre, and its influence still echoes in modern gaming, decades later. More than just a series, Super Mario Bros. Is a cornerstone of video game history, proof that timeless design never grows old. Thank you so much for sticking with me through such a long video. Don't hesitate to leave a like and subscribe. These projects take an enormous amount of time and effort, so seeing them completed is both a relief and a joy, especially that so many of you watch them until the very end. Huge thanks for all your encouraging comments. That means a lot, as I am not that confident in myself usually. I'll see you next week for the next video. Take care.